Hello, screenwriters, and welcome to Writing for Screens. Ask me almost anything. My name is Glenn Gers, and I come to you every Monday through Friday, if I can make it, at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Most of the time I've been doing this live stream showing you the step-by-step project, which is just a way to let you learn something about the process of writing a script by letting you watch me write one. But while I do that, I am open to questions, and sometimes I just take a whole hour to answer questions. So that's what we're going to do today. I am going to be answering 3 big questions that will start, and then anything else that comes up in the live stream. For those of you who want to know more about my basic approach to writing, and frankly have a lot of questions answered, go to my channel and check out the first 3 playlists. That's where I get all my basic stuff out there to you for free. The first one is called Screenwriting Essentials, the second one, Screenwriting's Tools, Skills, and Craft, and the third one, Process Being a Writer. And those are each 10-minute-ish videos where I try and condense down the most useful things I have onto the subject that is the thumbnail, genre, flashbacks, dramatic action, stuff like that. Wow, we got a whole bunch of people here. That is marvelous. Hello, Pedro. Hello, Mohammed. Hello, 99 Precinct. Hello, Nathan Dean. I am so glad that you have discovered it too. That's fabulous. And it's great to have you here on the live stream. I was off last week. Hi, Di. Larry is currently splitting wood, and thankfully we have technology. I hope you're split. Why are you splitting wood if you have technology? Although I guess there's some things that wood can do that technology can't, like make fires in fireplaces. It is great to see all of you. Yes, I am back after my week away. Hello, Jared. I was attending to family stuff with some visiting family, and now I am back. And I am going to go deep into a couple of Ask Me Anything questions, and of course, will answer as many Ask Me Anything questions as I can for all of you. The first question: can I use voiceover? Has been also phrased to me as, what's wrong with voiceover? Or, my professor said, never ever use voiceover. So therefore, oh, I get it. You have a gas-powered splitter. That is great. Very useful, I am sure. So the question of voiceover is one of those things that has become unnecessarily divisive and extreme. Here's the thing. Writing teachers sometimes will make rules or take positions because they are desperately trying to teach some particular lesson, and they think that for instance, they will say never use voiceover because they are afraid that people will write undramatically when they use voiceover. So I just believe that solution is not attending to the problem. The important thing is to understand what dramatic action is and be sure that you use it. You can find out more about dramatic action by going to my video, Dramatic Action, where I talk about the concept of when somebody is doing something on the screen, they need to have something that they are trying to accomplish. They are doing it for a reason. Writing teachers, and therefore, unfortunately, the producers and executives get it into their head that it is boring to have a voiceover, or it is undramatic, not good storytelling, show not tell, which honestly is just a disastrously bad phrase. So that therefore that people say, don't ever do voiceover. But the truth is, voiceover can be fabulous. Voiceover can absolutely be a part of it's been part of many great classic movies. I'm going to talk about some of them. But the basic thing you need to know about voiceover is that voiceover should add a layer to the story. In other words, it's not just replacing telling the story. It's not just explaining stuff that you're watching. It's adding some layer that otherwise would not be there. Adding sometimes a whole other character. And a character does not speak unless they are trying to accomplish something. So therefore, I would say the thing that you have to remember is that you do not use voiceover instead of a dramatic action. Like, you don't just have the voiceover tell the story, because then there's nothing to look at. There's no movie. That would be bad. You also do not want to have the voiceover tell us the same thing we are seeing. For instance, you would not want the voiceover to say, Charlie took the train downtown, and then we watch Charlie taking the train downtown. It's just not necessary. You always want voiceover to add a layer to the story. In other words, some dramatic, character-based or narrative element that wouldn't be there if that voice wasn't there. Now, Thumper has a good question. Are voices off counted as voiceover? No. We're talking about disembodied narration. We are not talking about somebody who happens to be off screen when they're talking. Voiceover is specifically a voice over the scene, not someone in the scene who just isn't on camera. So voiceover is a narrator, or sometimes there are other devices in which someone, for instance, you'll hear someone talking in another scene while we are seeing like a flashback. Indeed, Shawshank. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I did not put that on my list that I'm going to talk about. Yeah, absolutely. Shawshank is a very, very good example of a voiceover that adds layers to what we are seeing. In other words, you will see a scene, but the narrator, Red, will be explaining what those things mean because we don't know enough about prison life or about this particular prison and its problems. Sometimes he'll tell you the backstory of a character. And one of the reasons that you want to, that you allow that is because Red is a character. So his voiceover works because when he is telling you the story, he is telling it from the perspective of a person who knew Andy. And so therefore he wants to tell you about his friend Andy because he feels like it's a meaningful story and he wants to try and express and perhaps clear up misconceptions about Andy. Yes, definitely. Goodfellas is. I do have that on my list. So someone talking to their brain or telepathic speech could be, but more often it's narration or somebody doing storytelling. Hi, Gene. Yes, indeed, Mohammed. Voiceover. And by the way, I saw your question. I'm going to get to it soon. Voiceover in The Great Gatsby. This is actually one of the things that you often will see in something that has a literary basis. Shawshank Redemption, Great Gatsby. Those stories were written in the voice of a character. In other words, Nick in Great Gatsby, Red in Shawshank were people who experienced things and now are telling the story in writing the book. Many books are written from the point of view of one of the people who experienced these parts of the story. Sometimes there is omniscient narrator, meaning all-knowing, someone who isn't in the story but knows the story and is going to tell it to you. Any of those are completely legitimate forms of written storytelling, and film has discovered, we can do that too, especially because we have this thing called voiceover. When you're reading it on the page, you're simply reading the words that Nick or Red wrote down for you or was talking to you in. In voiceover on a screen, you are hearing the voice because we have the ability to take an audio track and simply lay it over whatever you want, or a picture or whatever else. Let's talk about some of the ways that voiceover can work. One of the main things you want to think about is, who is this voice? Who is your narrator? Why are they telling us this story? How are they telling us this story? Sometimes it's simply established at the beginning this person, there's a voice. It's telling you things, and you just say, okay, this story is being told to me. Sometimes the voiceover will be from a character. As I said, sometimes it will be omniscient. But even an omniscient narrator has a point of view on the people involved. A narrator may be telling you the story because he wants to give you a laugh, or he may be telling you a story to teach you some kind of lesson or give you some kind of insight. But the narrator has a personality. Even if they are omniscient, they have an attitude, a tone. You want to give your voiceover a voice. They want to be specific. They want to have a style, an attitude, a personality, a way of speaking, a way of looking at things. So that's one of the key things you want to do when you do a voiceover. The other thing you want to do when you are doing a voiceover is make sure that, as I said, you do not use it instead of an action. In other words, you do not want to just have somebody telling you this, like, frankly, sitting in a chair or being a voiceover, telling you stuff instead of letting it happen. Very often, instead of that, the narration will be used to cover transitions or areas of a story where we're summarizing. Because one of the things that film can't do is summarize. You cannot do, like in a book, you can say, that summer I learned to swim and I discovered that I really liked beer and that got me into big trouble, and afterwards I never swam again. That's a summary. You can't do that in a film. You have to actually show things happening. So one of the things you can do with a voiceover is you can summarize. You can say, this is what happened for these 5 years. Yeah, I'll get to it. It is definitely a little different. Yes, and unreliable. Let's get to all of those. Hello, Donna. The narrator can be a character even if he doesn't appear in the film. Exactly. Let's talk about some of these things that I'm talking about here in terms of specific movies so that I could tell you. For instance, Stanley Kubrick loves voiceover. So his movie Barry Lyndon, which is based in an 18th century, 17th? No, 19th century, but early 19th century novel, I think. Anyway, the point is, there is an omniscient narrator in this book, and therefore he gave the movie a narration, and this actually answers your question, Muhammad. Is it possible to have the character be a character even if he doesn't appear in the film? Yes, the narrator of Barry Lyndon has an attitude towards Barry. He is telling you a story as a moral lesson. He is not a character in the film, but in the story, but he is a character in the film because he is making judgments on the characters and the story. He is telling you things in such a way that you feel one way or another about a person, or he is explaining how society views certain characters, a society of the time. So therefore, in this case, you do have an omniscient narrator, but in Clockwork Orange, the narrator is omniscient in the sense that he knows everything in the story, but he is a character. Alex is telling his own story. He is telling it from the vantage point of someone who has finished the story. He knows where it's going, and he is telling you in his very specific voice. He is speaking in a language that we don't even know. It's a form of English that is made up for from the book that it's based on, and it's made up for the movie. It's a mixture of antique English and Russian and a lot of other garbled up things in it, street slang and other kinds of things from London at the time. But the point is, these are two very different forms of narrator who both have very specific voices. Now, the movie Apocalypse Now, which has an extraordinary voiceover, partly because it's written by just one of the best writers around, Michael Herr, was brought in to write the narration late in the process. The writing process began with adapting a book by someone who had been in Vietnam. And at a certain point, Coppola realized that he needed an additional layer voice, of sound of someone who had been there and understanding, but also a certain literary tone, which was then given to the main character. It is essentially a voiceover by the main character, but the writing of it is a very, very specific voice. So I'm just going to quickly run through and see about some of these before we go in. So yeah, unreliable narrator, very much so. The concept of the unreliable narrator is that the person who's telling you either is lying to you to try and manipulate you, or is lying to themselves. In other words, that this person who's narrating the story may be trying to give you a certain impression, or they may simply not understand themselves. So they're saying like, oh my God, these people were idiots, when in fact the main character is the idiot at the moment. And you can tell that. One of the most useful things about an unreliable narrator is that it allows you that separation between the story and the narration that I was talking about as of added value. In other words, you understand better than the narrator what is happening. An example of that is American Psycho. Not one of my favorite movies, actually. However, American Psycho does, I believe, does Patrick have voiceover? I'm trying to remember. I think he does, or maybe he just gives those damn speeches all the time. But the idea is that certainly Patrick has no knowledge of who he is. He does not understand himself. Then the other thing that an unreliable narrator can do is sometimes the narrator may either believe something that isn't true or want you to see them. In a sense, one of the people who's best at that is Scorsese, and Goodfellas indeed is a phenomenal example of this, because it is, you both are being drawn into the world of this person whose essentially memoir we are watching, but at the same time we are judging him. He may say, I think this was cool, and we are saying, I think this is horrible. This gets to a high point in Casino. Scorsese loves this narrative trick where, frankly, a lot of the movie will be summarized by a character. The character, in certain cases, cannot be relied upon. However, they were there. They understand things in a way. They are giving you insider knowledge. But at the same time, Scorsese also uses a form of voiceover to have Travis reading his journals. So in this case, the voiceover is a way to let us see inside a character's head, because in their journal, which if you were reading it in a book, you would simply read their journal. But in a movie, generally you don't like to ask people to read. So you have someone read it out loud. You hear the voice of the character reading out loud what he is writing. And in that, you understand how he is seeing things. Now, very often, what he's seeing is heavily tainted by his opinions of it, by his emotional reactions to it. So Scorsese is a really interesting storyteller, because he does not always want to tell a conventional dramatic action story. He wants to tell a story where there's a layer of narration, which is from a voice, a distinctive voice with a distinctive vision, but that narration is not always in sync with what you are seeing. It is either layering on insider knowledge or opinion, or sometimes there's a dissonance between the narration and the picture. In a TV series, if voiceover is used in the pilot, should be used in all episodes. Usually, there's not a solid rule about that. There could be one episode with voiceover. It would depend. It depends on the form and style of the series. But in general, whatever series style is locked in the pilot, they tend to stick with it. Yes. Is voiceover appropriate in terms of not describing action going on, but telling a whole philosophical speech or monologue while something else happens? Yes, Louis, that is exactly what I mean in many of these examples. Certainly in Casino or Goodfellas, this happens. It also happens a lot in Terrence Malick. We had, I believe, who was it who was asking about this? Anyway, yes, Terrence Malick in almost all, Thin Red Line. D-Real was asking about this. Anyway, Terrence Malick almost always, I can't think of any movies he has where he doesn't do this this voiceover layer. In the first two movies, which are really my favorites of his, a character who is in the story is narrating, but they are somewhat naive. They are essentially unreliable in that they do not have necessarily good insight into what's happening. But because of their honesty or their poetic way of speaking, they will give us understanding that they themselves don't necessarily have. In both cases, the character who's doing the voiceover will be somewhat innocent or somewhat deluded or not understanding all the motivations of the people involved. But because they are speaking truthfully, we understand things that they may not be able to put into words. Later in his career, Terrence Malick just went straight out for a type of poetry, spoken poetry, in which the characters were talking about their feelings, their philosophical visions, their memories. And in fact, in some of his later films, he would just film people living their lives, intending to later have characters speak over it and fill in the emotional depth of what's going on. Or the philosophical layers. All right, I'm just scrolling through here. Okay. Hi, John Darsano. I will get to you when we're done with the voiceover thing. Hey, Ches, how are ya? Yes, I am here 3 to 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, if possible, when I can make it on Monday through Friday. Would the narrator ever affect the plot, or is that a bad sign? I would never say never. It might be really fun. In fact, I do believe there's some good comedies where somebody... wait, there's that really cool Stranger Than Fiction. I believe there's a relationship between the characters and the narrator who is narrating them, and they are resisting. They're like, wait, I don't want to do what you just said I'm going to do. It's entirely about Stranger Than Fiction. It's a very interesting script. Would the narrator ever affect the plot? The characters would then have to be conscious of it. What I think more often happens is the narrator affects the plot because they are also a character in it. So they are sometimes narrating from their perspective. And that is not necessarily the only perspective in the story. But it's not usual that a character is conscious that they are in a movie that is being narrated. That is unusual, but I wouldn't say it's bad story practice. I would say it's interesting story practice. You'd have to think about how you are using it and why. How do you make interesting pilot? I will get to that's going to be after we're done with voiceover. Okay, my goodness, I've got to start. Okay, yeah. Yes, Stranger Than Fiction is indeed a remarkable movie. I didn't love it the first time I saw it, but the second time I really did. Cool, yes. All right, yes, thank you. So let's just do a couple more, because there's some other interesting situations with voiceover. For instance, I don't know if you've seen this, I've mentioned it before, Patterson by Jim Jarmusch is about a poet. He's a bus driver who lives in Patterson, New Jersey, and writes poetry. He bus drives as his day job, and then he's a poetry. He writes poetry. The poetry is spoken out loud. It is also written on the screen. Now, this is not narration. It's poetry. He's a poet. We are understanding what he does. Just like if he was a woodworker, we would watch him working with wood. Because he is a poet, the words are, the poetry is spoken. Sometimes it is in conflict with the scene. Sometimes it is very separate from the scene, or I think sometimes even commenting on what's going on in his life. The main thing is it's poetic, so it's not direct. I think the main character narration can kill suspense. It's telling a story. Yeah, well, here's the thing. And this is one of those things that people say, like, storytelling kills suspense. That's not necessarily true at all. The fact that someone will survive does not mean that we know how it will end or what that means. Life and death are not the only stakes. So, for instance, in Goodfellas, I want to be careful about spoilers, but in Goodfellas, the issue is, will he or won't he betray his gang, and if so, what will the consequences be? And therefore, we are the emotional stakes of his life, the quality and meaning of his life, is what we are following, and that is very much in doubt all the way through it. So therefore, the fact that it does not have to kill suspense. The other thing is that sometimes suspense is not the only thing that you're watching a movie for. Sometimes you're watching a movie for insight, for understanding. You want to understand how this guy, let's take Goodfellas as an example, how this guy went from being a young, ambitious gangster, and then he talks about how he rose to that, what his experience was as a kid, his life story of why he romanticized gangsters and why that mythology was then undermined. And that story has a suspense of what are we going to do with people who are both attractive and repellent? That's the suspense. How are we going to live with that? How is he going to live with both idolizing and recognizing the absolute murderous selfishness of these people? And that dichotomy is causing the suspense, the tension. So there's by hearing the narration, we're actually getting more suspense because we can understand what he's thinking or what people are doing without them necessarily having to play out those things right up front in scenes where they would not do it, because very often people don't say what they mean or tell you what they're going to do. And so therefore, the layer of narration is the layer of our perception, our understanding, which is a big part of our lives. When we are in a room full of people, we are perceiving and judging them and trying to figure out what they're up to or trying to decide how we feel about them. That's all happening in our heads. Sometimes you can play that out in the action, but sometimes you can't. And in every scene you can't. At some points, those things will burst out into action. But in other times, there's subtext, and sometimes the subtext is cool when it is layered in. That's why I always emphasize voiceover should add a layer to the story. Can a character narrate their expectations? Absolutely. That's very much what a lot of characters do. They can also, let's remember, characters are unreliable. I do not want to spoil things, but some characters do not survive even though they are the narrator. Okay. You are entirely welcome, Adam Post. I am very glad that you are here doing it. Hi, Joanna Urig. I am late to the game here. I used to write plays in college, and here I'm 20 years old. Cool. Well, I personally advise you to keep writing plays as well, because screenplays is, everyone knows this about me. I love to teach how to write screenplays, but I also want to advise that for creative satisfaction, screenplays can be very frustrating because you don't get to finish them. Somebody else has to make the movie. Unless you're going to do your own movies, which is great, and I heartily encourage that, but that's not for everybody. Plays, by the way, for anyone who's out there, learn to write for the theater if you can. You will become a better screenwriter because you get to understand what character and dialogue can do. And also, it's a whole other way to get your work done. In manga, voiceover is very predominant, especially, I don't know the isekai isekai genre, but I do know that manga has a whole lot of other rules. But yes, manga has some phenomenal voiceover, but it's very, very different. Oh, spoiler! But yes, in American Beauty, the narrator is in fact speaking from beyond. Better Call Saul is a great example of suspense, even though we know that's where Saul is going to end up. Very often, in fact, and this is part of a good narration, you do know where someone is going to end up, and the suspense is, how are they going to end up there, as in Better Call Saul. Whew, we are just racking it up. Sunset Boulevard. Guys, spoilers. Yes. Yes. And there are quite a few stories in which the narrator is in some way not, their fate is not what you would think. Okay. Yes, Death Note. Death Note, for all its ups and downs, its greatness and its flaws, has definitely a worthwhile anime with cool horror manga. Are you okay to kill the main character and then reveal who is the real main character? I am. I think that's great. If you can find a way to do that, the only thing you have to make sure of is that you don't have a main character run for like 3/4 of the story and then have someone else who you've not spent any time with being the real main character. The only thing that's important is that this main character should be a full, deep character. I want to talk about a couple of other types of narration. Amadeus is one in which you're essentially, you sometimes see, it's basically an interview with a character late in their life talking about an event earlier in their life. Likewise, by the way, The Great Gatsby and many other stories in which essentially the narrator is talking to someone else in the story about their past, and you keep going back into it, so that the bulk of the story, by far, is narrated but drama. So that is a whole other layer or ability to use narration and voiceover. I also want to talk about. Let's talk about Billy Wilder. Sunset Boulevard and Double Indemnity both have strong, well-written voiceover. One of the things that happened is certain rules were applied to cinema as if by a bunch of people who were talking about their specific taste and moment of history, ignoring the wide variety of abilities to tell stories. So, frankly, old movies, anime, there's all sorts of other styles of storytelling that do not stick straight with the Hollywood 1980 version, which is where all these screenwriting rules come from. They're not real rules. They're just styles. So in Double Indemnity, we have a character who is narrating in order to pass a message to another person. And it begins by, you see him, he's dictating this story, trying to explain to his boss what happened, how he got into he's an insurance salesman. How he got into this film noir story. Sunset Boulevard, as people have said, is narrated by a main character who may or may not survive. The Mission, phenomenal. Weird that it has so many De Niro movies, but not intentionally. He just picks good scripts a lot. The Mission is narrated by someone who survived the story as a report. He's a priest and he's reporting to the church on what the hell happened to this group of priests who went to build a mission in the jungle. By the way, if you don't know, it's not that well known anymore. It's a really excellent movie. So let's also talk briefly about It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life has voiceover and narration for a good, I think, half to 2/3 of the movie, in which God and an angel are discussing a human being who's the target of this operation to save his soul. So the characters are debating and discussing and telling each other stuff about this guy's life, George's life, which you would say, oh, that's bad storytelling. oh, it takes away the suspense. Absolutely the opposite. What it does is allows a narrative flexibility. You can understand things and you can jump around in ways that you never could in a conventional story. So in that case, the voiceover, the narration is crucial to the whole structure, even though at a certain point it just drops out. So like all these rules, oh, well, if you start with the voiceover, you have to keep with the voiceover. Not necessarily. And I want to talk also just briefly about what happens when you take away the voiceover. In Blade Runner, it was a film noir. There's a whole book about the making of Blade Runner, probably a couple at this point. One of the things they decided to do was, because it was a futuristic film noir, they allowed for a film noir voiceover. It's just a stylistic, acceptable way to do it, is you have the tough guy detective narrating his story. That was the original cut. However, Blade Runner famously got recut, I think 4 or 5 times. There's actually some kind of box set where you can see 4 different versions. The final cut, which is now available, does not have the voiceover, which means that you can compare, I mean, aside from other structural differences, you can compare whether the story is understood the same way with and without this layer of world-weary judgment that the detective is trying to lay on to his story. I personally like the original with the voiceover better. I think it's actually cool. I think it lends a tone which helps us to get a grip on how to understand this story. Now, I'm going to end just with this fascinating case. There's a movie called 11 Harrow House. I guarantee you, none of you have ever seen it. It's a caper movie. It is a movie about a small-time diamond merchant who gets involved in a operation to rob the biggest diamond house in London. It's a really fun little caper movie from the 70s called 11 Harrow House. But here's the thing. The movie was narrated in the original version. I don't know if it was written that way. I do know that the narration is essential because it is by the main character, and he has an attitude towards the events, which is an essential layer, which is not present if you don't have the voiceover. I don't know if it was added later. They said this movie isn't funny enough without it, but I know that there's this irony. He's commenting on the things that he was getting into and the problems he was having and the characters he's dealing with in a crucial way. However, for some reason, when they released the movie to television and some versions of VHS, they took the voiceover out. I don't know if it was an accident or just a weird creative decision, but so I remember once I watched it, I was like caught at late night TV back in the 80s. I was like, I saw this movie in the theater. It had a voiceover, and now I'm watching it on TV and it doesn't. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense without it. I believe later they restored it. But there are 2 versions of this movie floating around out there, one with voiceover and one without. And it is cataclysmically bad without and really good with the voiceover. So just something to think about. Okay. Let me get to... I'm sorry, I'm just going to quickly go. Yes, the mission is awesome. Absolutely. We're going to end on our discussion of voiceover, so I will get to all the other questions we've had. Could voiceover be replaced by visual cues? Maybe. That's not an absolute either or. You can sometimes do that. That is certainly a great way to, it's a question of how you want to tell the story. When you say making them realize things by seeing specific scenes, yes, you can cut away to someone and find out that they are betraying. You could have a flashback. There are many ways that you can give information that is not voiceover. The question is, do you want to? It's not right or wrong to do either one. I think it would be really rough to write a movie with voiceover and then say, no, let's take all the voiceover out and put in other things. That would probably be rough. Not impossible, but I think it would be rough. Is it still voiceover if a character keeps talking over a subsequent scene they're not in? Yeah, kind of. It depends. Very often you'll do that. That's sort of called prelap. In other words, a character will start talking because they're discussing something in another scene, but we'll see it over somebody else doing something else or a memory. And then it'll turn out that we'll go into the scene where that dialogue is actually happening. Yes, I think that's A, voiceover, and B, legitimate. Okay. That's odd because back in the day, no, this was not. This was like late night. This was not premiere movie. This was just, they were doing the movie for TV and they, for some reason, decided to drop it wasn't like a special edition. It was just, they just decided to do it. And I don't know why. Okay, so let me get to a bunch of your questions since you've had a bunch of questions. Let's see. So Muhammad said, how do I write a scene that happens in the middle of another scene? Let me go way back to this. How do I write a scene that happens in the middle of another scene? It's not a flashback, not a flash forward. It's an illusion kind of dream of the character for a second. Oh, that happens all the time. I think there's a really great one in Malcolm X. I think there's a moment when Malcolm X is a Pullman porter. When he was early in his life, he was working as a waiter on a train, and I believe there's a scene where some really annoying white person is asking him a question or giving him criticism, and he just smashes the guy in the face with a piece of pie or something, and then it cuts back and he's still holding the pie, and we realize that was just what he wanted to do. Yeah, that happens a lot. It's great. It absolutely can be done. Okay, let's see. Okay, so let's talk about John. What are my daily schedule like both now and before YouTube? Okay, so here's the deal. My schedule, and I kind of talk about this in let's see. Create a Ritual. My video, Create a Ritual. I talk about different writers' different schedules and the different meaning of them. And I also think in one of, I'll try and look this up and see. I think in one of the other AMAs I talk about this. It depends on how you work. In other words, I am really good in the morning and really bad in the afternoon. Part of the reason that I did the YouTube in the afternoon is because I'm burned out. I'm not going to do any good writing in the afternoon anyway, so I might as well do something else. After dinner, I am useless. I do not work at night. I have good friends who work only at night. There was, in fact, a cool chart I had. I'll try and find it. But anyway, there's a chart in which... did I keep it? Yes. No. Sorry. Everyone works in their own way. I happen to write very well first thing in the morning. I also write in very short bursts. So while I may write from 7 in the morning till 11 in the morning, I'm not actually sitting writing all that time. I'm getting up from my desk, I'm getting coffee, I'm walking around, I'm reading a book, I'm trying not to check the internet every 5 seconds. That's how I work. Other people, they need to focus, not be interrupted, and because they build it instead of it takes them a while to get going, so they have to stay in it. For me, I find, and for what I understand, most writers can't write more than 4 or 5 hours in a session. But you could take a lunch break and then go back and do another 4 or 5 hours if you're really tough or if you're really working on something that's got you going. It's hard. It's hard to write for a long period of time. If they take like brain scans of people being creative, their brain is like literally cooking. It's hot. It gets hot from all the activity in your brain. You wear out when you are being creative. So make sure you're getting a lot of water and some food and some exercise. So that is the answer. Both now and before YouTube, that's it. The answer is I fit YouTube into, I am not actually currently writing. One of the reasons I'm going to eventually end doing these live streams is because I want to get back to writing, and I can't do both. This takes a fair amount of preparation. I'm also answering a lot of questions daily, so I do not actually do much writing in these years that I've been doing the YouTube thing. I set myself YouTube as my creative project for these years. Okay, so boom, 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 boom. Do you have any advice on how to make an interesting pilot? I would say the first advice is decide what you think an interesting pilot is. I would say look at my video, Take Art Apart. The idea of look at the pilots that you think are good and start from there. Say what about them is good. Some people, the pilot will kind of be, there's so many different ones. I think the most important thing about a pilot is you've got to establish who the main characters are. For me, that's important. Not every main character, but at least if you've got some main characters and then you have a larger ensemble or whatever it is, that you need to have in at least some of them in the pilot. We need to get involved in, it's the big 6 questions, 6 essential questions. Who is it about? What do they want? Why can't they get it? What do they do about that? That's got to somehow be in the pilot. You need to find out who you're talking about, even if other characters are going to join later. Somebody has got to have something that they want or need by the end of that first pilot. I would say that's the main thing. The other thing I'd say is establish a tone, a style, a world. That's really important for distinguishing how your pilot is going to work, how your series is going to work. And the main thing is you want to end on some form of question, twist, reveal, something that makes you say, oh, I'm not done. I want to see what's going to happen with that. That's the other thing I would say about a pilot. Do you have any tips for scripts that, rather than blending a genre, begin with one and become another? I would say that is a cool thing, but risky. The business does not like those because they can't sell either one. In other words, if they put out a poster that says this thing is a horror movie and then it ends up in the second half it's a rom-com, anyone who went in for a horror movie is going to be pissed off. And anyone who went in who wants to see the rom-com is not going to want to see the horror movie. So if you advertise it as a rom-com, you're going to get people who's like, I'm not watching that. It's got a horror movie at the beginning. You're going to put them off at the beginning. So you would have to get a company that was willing to advertise the transition of genres. Now, like it gets in like Nope. Nope is coming out soon. I haven't seen it yet, but the trailer is saying we've got a UFO movie here, but clearly there is more to it. I don't know what that more is yet, but I do know that there is more to it. But on the other hand, they still have a sort of established genre of the sci-fi mystery movie. So I would say just in general, my tip for those scripts is figure out how you can signal that it is not going to be what you think it will be, or be prepared to make it yourself because just no one wants to release it because they don't know how to advertise it. Okay. Sorry, I'm just reading all your comments and trying to catch up to where we are. Enjoy yourselves while I read. Okay, this is an interesting one. Okay. Do you ever take into account the level of intelligence of your audience when writing it, making it easier for them to understand or harder for them to understand? Wow, that's a really fascinating question. It's tricky because the answer is yes. Here's the thing. Your audience is going to, like anybody who's in the screen business is trying to reach the biggest possible audience. So it's not even just a level of intelligence, it's also cultural differences. In other words, different audiences, different types of audiences are going to be different, and different places. Like, you're going to get a very different audience in different countries and different areas of the world. So therefore, what I believe you have to do is sort of pick an audience. You have to say, I am going to do this, like I am going to set this up for a highly film educated or highly academically educated audience, and I'm going to signal to them things that they would understand that other people might not. You are narrowing your audience. You are going to have to choose your budget based on that. The things that tend to go, for one thing, anything verbal is very hard to get to a wide audience. Level of intelligence is very tricky. What kind of intelligence are we talking about? Are we talking about education, or are we talking about street smarts? I can guarantee you, having met people on both sides of that line, there are a lot of very smart people who cannot literally get through a day because they are so not street smart, that they may have no emotional intelligence. There's so many forms of intelligence. So what I would say is, I do believe that you do have to decide, I am going to keep this really simple, that someone who is not sophisticated in the ways of complex storytelling can follow it, or I'm going to, like Christopher Nolan, it and push it so that only someone who's willing to study this forwards and backwards is going to understand it. Do I ever do that? Yes. Do I have a target audience? I try to have the target audience be me. Because I'm a real sucker for all sorts of different things. But you could easily decide you know a type of person or a group of people and say, that's my audience. Companies will always say, make sure someone who is not paying that much attention, someone who is not that sophisticated or educated, can understand this. Is that right? It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to accomplish pushing some boundary of artistic achievement, and that often is very appealing to producers, but they're saying, wow, will the audience understand this, Christopher Nolan? So there you go. I wish you could pay for super chats. Thank you. That's very kind. At the moment, I am okay that to just be my pay is this the opportunity to think that I have actually passed some useful information on. Yeah, I can only write in short person. Yeah, absolutely. Everyone, this goes back to the question of your writing schedule. I only write in short bursts. What I tried to learn to do is stack up a bunch of short bursts with other things in between. Yeah. Yes, I'm going to try to answer everybody. Do you have a list of set scenes, depending on what genre you're writing, that you must include? I'll tell you where you can find the answer to that, because that is set pieces. And I did a whole video about them. Set pieces are exactly what you just asked, D-Real. They are a bunch of, not set scenes, but types of scenes, things that fulfill the needs of the genre, push the envelope of the genre, that are part of the expectations or pleasures of a genre. And set pieces are the moments that you not only do that, but you make sure that the audience knows, hey, I'm going all out with this thing. This is going to be a funny scene. This is going to be an action scene. This is going to be a sad scene. Depending on what type of movie it is and what the expectations are, you are trying to give the people who came to a type of movie the thing they came for. And I would say, absolutely, you do want to do that. You do want to watch my video on that, because I say it much better. It's okay. I really appreciate that. Just give me likes and we're good. Voiceover can be a way of letting the viewer into the mind of the character. Yes, absolutely. I have not worked out the money thing that much. I honestly, I gotta say, I'm kind of liking that I am the one person on the internet not asking you for money. That's kind of my like I'm hoping people will be like, whoa, I may actually listen to this person more because he's not asking me for any money. So not to say, by the way, that the people who support themselves by doing that, I'm retired. I'm living off my pension. Okay. I worked 25 years as a Hollywood writer with a union. Unions get you pensions. Every time I did a job, my union said to the company, we need you to put some money in an account for this guy. Okay, that's what unions do for you. Unions, as much as there may be some don't trust unions talk out there, unions, one thing they often do is give you a benefit program which includes health coverage and pension. So I put in 25 years working for the Writers Guild of America, through the Writers Guild of America, for many different companies, and the Writers Guild of America took care of me. They said, we're going to get these people to pay into a pension, and they held that for me for 25 years. And now, when I am not working anymore because I'm old and nobody wants to hire me, I get to take that pension money out. So that's where I'm getting my money, for those of you who want to know. It's not a lot, compared to what one gets when you're writing movies, but it's not bad. Anyway. Yes. Yeah, exactly. You do want to be clear, although, some people don't want to be clear. They want to say, I want to make a kind of art where people have to work. And to a certain extent, I believe that's a good idea. It's tricky. It's very, very tricky. Saturday, I watched RRR, a Hindi film. It felt like a violent children's fairy tale because it treated the audience like dummies. I wouldn't say, from what I understand, I've only seen parts of RRR. It's simply a different language. It's not that they're talking down, it's that they're talking in the language. It's like saying an action movie is dumb. It's not dumb. It's just that the direct expression to the audience is part of the storytelling. And there are some good movies like that. By the way, there's another good voiceover movie, The Man Who Would Be King, filmed by John Huston, back from the 70s. Sean Connery, Michael Caine. Is a good version of a narrated voiceover. RRR is in the language of Indian film, of a film from the Indian subcontinent or from that part of Asia. I do not know properly how to define it, but I do know that some people call that kind of film Bollywood. I'm not a big, that seems a little, a little insulting. Although, Hollywood kind of insulting too. So anyway, the point is RRR is speaking in a language of kind of over the top presentational characterization and storytelling, very much like anime often does. Anime often, the people just announce themselves and they're these big, bold characters who often act apparently inconsistently because everything's right on the surface. Anyway, so yeah, it's different, but it's also kind of impressive because it is so intense. Anyway, you are welcome, Derail. This question of whether or not you get a big audience or a small audience, and whether, the line where you decide that the language that you understand will be too hard for people to understand. People are always pushing that envelope. Some of them push it as far as they can. Others, like, you look at the movie Midnight Cowboy, it came out in 1969, I believe. At that time, that kind of storytelling, which was all this jagged intercutting of images that were commenting on things, bits of flashback, all sorts of stuff like that. There's a lot of people who could have watched this and said, I don't understand what's going on. I'm used to an old-fashioned story where everyone they stay inside the picture. But that kind of language is now commonplace. Thank you very much. Okay, so a couple of last questions. What is my take on writing being so political? Do you think it's closing off creativity? That's a tricky question because there is a fair argument that writing is always political. That always has been, always will be, that anything you write has a meaning, whether you are intending to proselytize that meaning or not. It is depicting society in a certain way and therefore is political. What I think you're talking about is that I don't believe that writing is so political. I think that everyday life is so political, and therefore writing is being judged more in a polarized political way. However, the writing itself does not. I mean, there probably are cases where companies are saying, "Don't write that; it's going to offend this group," or "Don't write that; it could be misinterpreted here." So that is sad. That I don't like. I think that the more that everyone can say all sorts of stuff, the better. Do I believe that you should be able to write hate speech? Tough call. Overall, I guess the question would be not are you able to, but why would you do it? It's not, I don't want to say somebody isn't able, but I can say I don't necessarily want to pay to see that, or I don't want to run a company where they do that because I don't want to say that. So therefore, it kind of, I think it's easier to simply have people take some responsibility for what they are saying, and if you truly believe hateful things, should you have the right to say it? It depends. There's a lot of things I think should not be said, but there is a damage to restricting speech that concerns me, scares me, but I do not believe that everything is equal in voices. So I guess my main question on writing today being political, I don't think writing today is particularly political at all. In fact, I think most companies shy away from politics to the point that there's a weird gap between what's political and what's not. I think that the audience is political. I think that the audience is jumping on Star Wars and making political arguments over the casting of Star Wars, and that's just frankly pathetic as far as I'm concerned. Let people do their art, and if you don't like it, you don't like it. Videos and screen, I'm wondering, how do I first submit a first screen, being that I live in Pittsburgh? Do I need to live in LA? I actually did look back in my Ask Me Anythings. I will try and find out, do you need to live in LA? The answer is, you can't submit a screenplay to anyone without an agent. All you can do is go into contests, things like that, hopefully get an agent. Do I get an agent or a manager? Yes, you would have to. This is something that there's tons of information out there. Honestly, if you type that question into Google, you get better answers. Script Magazine. There is a great podcast that I recommend often about this kind of stuff, which is the Screenwriting Life podcast. I urge you to check that out because that is where they have a lot of really good career type advice, as well as creative advice. The Apartment is a really fascinating example of voiceover, by the way, because there's a voiceover at the beginning of the movie and then never again. There's this weird sort of like newsreel voiceover, like, oh, this is the city, this is the business he works in, and here's this poor schmuck, and then all of a sudden and then you never hear from that voice again. So just another case of rules schmools. Rules are ideas to think about. Okay, we gotta wind down. Why is it harder to get work in Hollywood when you're older? Because people are afraid that and legitimately so, that older writers are not paying enough attention or speaking the language of the younger audience. And that is honestly legit. It's not the only value, and it's not the only audience, but since the larger audience in some ways is the young audience, it used to be, things are changing because ticket sales are no longer the main driver of profits. So therefore, because it used to be just kids would go to the movies more often than old people, and they would go repeatedly. So therefore, that was a bigger audience. Now the answer is also just a lot of the executives are young, and they don't want to hear some old person say, oh, I remember this old thing. It's like a lot of old people are frankly out of it. A lot of my friends, and even I to a certain extent, don't know what's going on. I don't know what a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old would think about certain things. And I don't know how they would do certain things, so therefore I am not an appropriate person to write about that. On the other hand, there's some great stories about people who are over 50 that are not being told. So there you go. Yeah, but it's also like a musical. I hear what you're saying, but it's like it's like a musical. It's like it's just a different language. Okay, I'm going to have to start to close down the questions. I'm writing a mystery film, about to pitch it to a producer I've worked for as an actor. Would it really mean a lot if you could break down kind of ways to approach producers? That I'll have to do another time when I can prepare more for that. That's a question that requires a lot of preparation to explain. Also, Division about the whether it's written kids. Yeah, the point about writing for kids is you're just thinking in terms of frankly, American culture has a certain style for dealing with kids. But the truth is, there's also frankly large, only like not particularly literate audiences out there that many art forms try and appeal to. Not everyone is going to be a sophisticated audience, and yet they often go to the movies. This happened a lot in silent film. I'm really trying to be to not suggest that one culture is better than another or one style is better than another, because I sincerely don't believe that. But one of the main things about silent film, one of the reasons that silent film broke out as big as it did culturally, is because you didn't have to read to understand most of it. They would put subtitles in. Now and then people would have to read them out loud for the people in the audience, because a large part of the audience of silent films was not literate. And it would travel internationally more easily. So, and that style of silent film storytelling and acting was equally weird, big, direct, exaggerated. It's not bad. It's just different. Okay. Hi, Kristen Walker, saying, wrote a book per year. Yes. Thank you, Kristen. I am really glad to hear that. I personally believe that is workable. The things I'm saying, most of the things I'm saying do not depend on screenplay format, because I'm not a big fan of screenplay format. I truly believe everyone out there writing a screenplay should try to turn it into a novel or a play or a podcast, narrative podcast. Okay, I'm going to have to take the rest of these questions and do them another time. Hi, Calvin. Plot holes. I will try to answer another time. I think they're getting away from the genre to put their agendas in. That's too big a generalization for me. I think some people may, some companies may, but overall, I don't think there's no overall control pushing the art politically. But the translation in Hindu, it sounds better. And yes, exactly. Okay. Sorry, we're running long, and I need to go. You mentioned in your video process questions, situation determine their behavior. Is there a certain sequence of which? No, absolutely not. They are exactly. You've got it there. They are questions to apply to the situation. There is absolutely, the one thing you can say about me is I'm going to say, ain't no rules about this. They are just tools that you can apply depending on what your particular work is like and whether or not the type of work that you want to do follows a certain formula. If it does, follow that formula. No, I don't. Does he? I don't think C.C. Baxter ever does speak in the voiceover. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't. Do you like Disney's Star Wars and Paramount Star? I like all that stuff. I haven't seen all of it because they're just churning it out way too fast for me. But I like Star Wars, and I like Star Trek from before it was Paramount Plus. Okay. Thank you. It's great, all of you. Hello, Crunk Girl. Good to see you. No, it wasn't you. I just got more questions than I was prepared for. You are so welcome, good content. Thank you, by the way, for your financial offer. Okay, everybody, I gotta go. It is great to see you all. I am thrilled, and we will meet again tomorrow. Go write something.